Imagine 2,000 soldiers sharing the same sponge every single day for years, not passing around a cloth, not rotating supplies, the same sponge on a stick, dipped in a bucket of salt water, used by one man, rinsed, and handed to the next. And here's the thing. This wasn't considered gross. This was considered civilized. How? The Roman army was the most dominant military force the ancient world had ever seen. They conquered half the known world. They built roads that still exist today. They invented concrete, aqueducts, and central heating. These were not primitive people stumbling through history. These were engineers, strategists, builders of systems so efficient, so ruthless, so precise that historians are still trying to fully understand them. So when you learn that Roman soldiers shared a single sponge on a stick for their bathroom needs, your first instinct is probably disgust, maybe confusion. Maybe you think you've misread something. You haven't, but what looks like a barbaric habit at first glance is actually a window into one of the most sophisticated logistical systems ever created. A system designed to keep thousands of men healthy, disciplined, and ready to fight in a world where disease killed more soldiers than swords ever did. The sponge wasn't the problem. The sponge was the solution. Let's start with the setting, because context is everything here. A Roman military fortress, called a castrum, was not a rough camp in the woods. It was a miniature city, built in days, sometimes in hours. It had streets laid out in a grid, a commander's headquarters at the center, barracks for the men, a hospital, a granary, a bathhouse, and yes, a latrine. Not a trench, not a hole in the ground, a latrine. The Roman military latrine was a long stone bench, carved with evenly spaced holes, positioned over a continuously flowing channel of water. That channel connected to the fortress's drainage system, which connected to a sewer, which eventually emptied far away from where the soldiers lived, ate, and trained. Beneath the bench, a second smaller channel ran with fresh water, constantly moving, constantly flushing. This was running water. In the 2nd century BC, the Romans understood at a fundamental level that human waste near a food and water supply was a death sentence for an army. They didn't have germ theory. They didn't know about bacteria, but they had watched enough armies fall apart from dysentery, typhoid, and intestinal plague to understand. You keep waste away from your men, or your men die. The latrine wasn't a luxury. It was a weapon against disease. And at the end of that stone bench, in a bucket of salt water or vinegar water, sat the xylospongium, the sponge on a stick. Here's exactly how it worked. The xylospongium, from the Greek words for wood and sponge, was a natural sea sponge fixed to the end of a wooden or bone handle, about the length of your forearm. The sponge itself was roughly the size of your fist. Natural sea sponges have a porous, open structure that makes them remarkably absorbent and, critically, remarkably easy to rinse clean. After a soldier used it, he would dip the sponge into the channel of flowing water running beneath the bench, or into the communal bucket, swish it around, maybe scrub it against the stone channel walls, and return it to the bucket. The bucket contained either plain water, salt water, or, more commonly, acetum. Vinegar, specifically diluted Roman vinegar, which had mild antimicrobial properties. It wasn't sterile by modern standards, but it was far better than nothing. And in the ancient world, far better than nothing was the difference between a functioning army and a dying one. Some scholars debate exactly how communal these sponges were. Some argue each soldier had his own. Others point to literary and archaeological evidence suggesting they were shared within a given latrine section. The Roman philosopher Seneca actually described a man who used the sponge on a stick to kill himself, shoving it down his throat, rather than face execution in the arena. The detail he mentions is that the sponge was the one kept by the toilet door. Communal, public, available to anyone who needed it. So yes, shared. But here's what matters. In a world with no running water, in private spaces, no toilet paper, no tissue, no cotton, the xylospongium used correctly, in a properly draining latrine, with water flowing beneath your feet, was dramatically more hygienic than almost any alternative available anywhere else on Earth at that time. Now, let's talk about the men using the system, because this is where the story gets human. A Roman legionary soldier was between 17 and 45 years old. He had signed up for 20 to 25 years of service. He had left his home, his family, everything he knew. He might be stationed in the deserts of Syria, the forests of Germania, the swamps of Britain, or the mountains of